Welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown, where each time we meet, we run down the news of the week with a variable degree of snark. I'm your host, Stephen Foskett from Gestalt IT, and joining me today is a different co-host, Zach DeMeyer. Zach, welcome to the show.
Hello, Stephen. Happy to be here.
So, Zach, turns out today is National Milk Chocolate Day. So let me just ask you, what's your favorite kind of chocolate?
Oh man, that's such a great question. I'm a sucker for Cadbury. They make some great chocolate. How about you, Stephen?
Man, I gotta say, I apologize to my European counterparts, but I am a sucker for just a good old Hershey's milk chocolate bar. Maybe the one with almonds in it. Man, that is a good candy.
Can't mess with the classics.
Can't mess with the classics. So jumping into the news, Zach, the popular workspace chat app Slack, which, full disclosure, we're paying customers of, is now officially owned by Salesforce, which, full disclosure, we're also paying customers of. That marks 658,487 companies that Salesforce has taken over in the first quarter. And with the addition of Slack to Salesforce, the only difference we've seen so far is this dumb huddle feature. What do you think of this acquisition, and where do you think it's going to take Slack in the future?
Yeah, Stephen, I thought Slack was going to really hold it out. It seemed like they had a good idea. I love using it. It's a great tool, and it makes a lot of sense to use for me. But Salesforce has it now, and maybe they're going to go the way of, say, a Microsoft Teams and start incorporating a lot of video conferencing. Obviously, in this day and age, that's a very big thing. But there are a lot of other players in that field, so it seems to me like that won't be really the most profitable thing at the end of the day for Salesforce. It's kind of just like adding their voice to an already loud room full of people shouting. But beyond that, I'm curious. I think that there could be some good things that could come out of this. But at the end of the day, we've seen some acquisitions recently where some of the bigger companies kind of just take in the smaller company and then just incorporate their technology, and you never hear from them again. And honestly, like I said, I'm a big fan of Slack, and I'd be really sad if it just became Salesforce Chat R Us or whatever they might consider naming it. So I think it's got some promise, but we'll have to stay tuned and see what really happens. So Stephen, the giant chip maker ARM, we've talked about them a couple times on the show. They just recently unveiled a new prototype of a chip which features a 32-bit Cortex M0 CPU and 456 bytes of ROM and 128 bytes of RAM. And you might be sitting there thinking that's like nothing. Why is that important? Well, this chip is printed entirely on flexible plastic, making it the most complex flexible chipset to date. They just recently featured in an article in the journal Nature, where ARM researchers said that their metal oxide thin film transistors, or TFTs, will pave the way for a potential Internet of Everything, where, for example, your milk bottle could detect if the contents inside are spoiled and change the expiration date so that hey, this is bad milk. But Stephen, what do you make of this?
Yeah, this is one of those things that does come up quite a lot at the Tech Field Day events, and especially on the AI Field Day side. If you want to be terrified, imagine this chip was not a regular bogus processor with a hard-coded application, but was instead an AI processor that was using artificial intelligence to decide whether your milk was spoiled. That's happening. And as we saw with companies like BrainChip, these things are in the works. And combining tiny low-power ML chips with this plastic flexible chip construction mechanism with technologies like RFID, and there's some cool power technologies that use flexion as a way to generate current, electric current, or Peltier junctions to generate current based on differences in temperature. We will soon have the Internet of Everything. Is it happening now? No, this is still absolutely a rough prototype. Like I said, this is they had to hard code in an application for it to run just to prove that it's working. But this is the direction that things are heading. And I will not be at all shocked to have AI powered milk bottles and cups and everything in the future. That's the future. It's not the Internet of Things, it's the Internet of everything. So another one of my favorite applications is in the news this week, and that's 1Password, which, full disclosure, I'm a paying customer of because it's awesome. 1Password just doubled their unicorn status to $2 billion following a $100 million round of funding led by Excel and including a whole bunch of people, including Ashton Kutcher. Zach, this seems to be a week for acquisitions and investments and things. Do you think that raising the value puts 1Password on the table for some of the big companies to start thinking about acquiring?
Stephen, I think that it does. And honestly, ever since I got into security in the field of IT, I've only heard security professionals saying, get a password manager, get a password manager, get a password manager. And it turns out they're right. It's really the best way to keep all of your passwords unique and complex and still, able to remember them, because at the end of the day, you don't have to. Some application can do it for you. And, just given the efficacy of password managers and the overall popularity, I would not be surprised to see someone like Microsoft, who, just a couple of weeks ago, we said they just recently announced another acquisition of another, growing security company. And given this massive valuation of 1Password, they, Microsoft kind of would be one of the few big fish that could really take a bite out of them. So I would not be surprised to see, some sharks circling in the water, if you will, kind of sniffing around 1Password, just from the sheer, usefulness of the tool itself. But time will tell. Maybe they will be able to stick it out and kind of just make really a headway in the field of password management. All right, Stephen. Up next, we're gonna talk about an old favorite of ours. The folks over at Intel, just recently came to light that they are starting up a new business, focusing entirely on chip making, called their Foundry service, and they just announced their first customer. Qualcomm, the makers of the popular Snapdragon mobile processor, are in fact signing up to get the first chips off the Foundry services line. So, Stephen, is this a big shift for Intel or Qualcomm, or is it just another twist in the, twisting, turning road of semiconductors?
I'd say that this announcement is all about Intel and not about Qualcomm at all. Quite frankly, Pat Gelsinger announced that Intel was going to be producing chips for other customers, which, by the way, is a thing that Intel has done for a long, long time. But kind of making it into a division, making it into a real focus for the company, having this be one of the early moves from their new CEO says that this is a big deal for Intel, or the future Intel. And frankly, the future Intel needed a big customer, a name brand customer, recognizable customer, to show that there is faith in their ability to do this, to deliver chips on behalf of others and compete with TSMC and Samsung and many others in this space. So yeah, they announced it. But read between the lines and you'll see that there's actually nothing here yet. Qualcomm has not announced which chip they're going to have Intel manufacture. And that's because the process node that they're going to manufacture on doesn't exist yet. It's Intel's 20 angstrom process node, which we're going to be talking about in a few minutes here. So essentially, there's nothing here at all except an announcement. But the announcement is important because it allows Intel to go out there and say, look, Intel Foundry Services is a thing. Qualcomm, who is a big chip maker, a fabless chip maker that has others manufacture their chips for them, is going to have Intel manufacture their chips for them. And this is all good. And it is. It's good news for Intel. Good on you, Pat, for getting a erstwhile competitor signed on as one of your partners for this venture. And let's see what happens in, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. And we'll see if this is still news. So keep watching the rundown. We'll give you an update in a couple of years. Did you hear, Zach, that there's some kind of sporting competition happening right now? It's called the Olympics, I think, something like that, in a far off land called Tokyo. So the Olympics are happening, and what better way to celebrate human athletic excellence than with a robot that sinks 3-pointers? During the USA-France basketball game earlier in the competition, Toyota rolled out a terrifying robot clad all in black that looks like a little bit like LeBron James in Space Jam. And it proceeded to grab a basketball and shoot perfect free throws and 3-pointers and half-court shots very slowly, and NBA players just laughed and laughed. Zach, what do we think of the future robot overlord Olympics?
Honestly, having watched the footage, I've got to say the robot does have a great shot, but I doubt he plays very good defense. So, at the end of the day, it'll be a really high scoring Olympics, at least from a basketball standpoint. But we've seen a lot recently by way of robots that are mimicking human tasks, especially athletic ones. With Boston Dynamics and really kind of all of the things that are coming out of there. It's the robot overlord is a very real possibility here in the next few let's say decades. Let's hope it's decades, because I'm not ready for being taken over by robots quite yet, but we'll get there. But until then, I think we can just let this guy shoot his nice shots, and celebrate that we do have the capability to do that. It's quite cool. So, Stephen, it's we've talked about some cool things, but let's dig a little deeper into some of the stories that are coming out of this week. And this first one, I think, is probably going to be pretty interesting for you, especially. We just recently heard from AMD that they have announced their earnings from the past quarter, and they saw an explosion in revenue, nearly doubling their results from Q2 last year to a whopping $3.85 billion. Notably, their enterprise, embedded, and semi-custom segments saw some of the largest growth, booking a $1.6 billion revenue this quarter alone, which is just massive. And ultimately, they're just continuing to chug forward at pace, with plans to close up their acquisition of Xilinx at the end of the year. Stephen, what do you make of these massive numbers coming out of AMD? And do you think they're going to acquire Xilinx in the coming months, or is it going to be something that's going to be closer to the end of the year?
Yeah, so there's kind of two things going on here. Again, we're going to talk a little bit more about Intel's news here in a minute. So let's just focus on AMD. Good on you, AMD. Nice job. They are firing on all cylinders. Lisa Su is doing a great job. The company is developing some of the best x86 processors on the market. The Zen 3 architecture is just killing it. They just have a good product, good company, good everything. AMD breaks out their revenue basically into two different reporting segments. There's the computing and graphics segment, which includes the Ryzen processor that you recently bought, as well as the Radeon GPU that you bought to go with it. And that segment has really performed well this quarter. Income is up to over $526 million on the quarter. And that compares to only $200 million last quarter. So, wow, that's incredible. And that's based on, $2.25 billion of revenue in the quarter for Q2. So again, they went out there and sold over $2 billion worth of Ryzens and Radeons, and amazingly, that's not the big story. The big story is what's going on the other side of the business, what they call the enterprise, embedded, and semi-custom business. Now, this business is only $1.6 billion on the quarter, but it's risen to $1.6 billion from only $500 million in the same quarter last year. And income from this segment has grown from a paltry $33 million in the same quarter last year to almost $400 million in this one. In other words, epic is epic. That's, I think, what's driving this trend. And I think that's the real story. So if you ask analysts, they say, yeah, Ryzen's awesome. Radeon's awesome. It's great that AMD's selling GPUs and chips to enthusiasts. And it's also great that they're actually making more money on those. So average selling price is up. But what the real news is that they're killing it in the data center. And this takes it to Intel, because this is Intel's bread and butter. And AMD is, I guess, eating Intel's bread and butter. We don't usually report on financials, but it's important, I think, from that perspective for our listeners to think about the fact that AMD's server business is really, really growing like crazy. So you're not the only one looking at those epic servers and saying, wow, that looks like a really nice alternative. That being said, Intel actually reported some strong numbers too. So there's also another thing that's happening here, which is that frankly, data center builds are still incredibly strong and even strengthening. So this means that all these other companies in the space that make memory and storage are going to be rising as well. So many of us are looking to companies like Western Digital to see where they're going to be reporting. Micron, who are also participating in this data center space and theoretically benefiting from this. And not to mention the big guy, NVIDIA. So the news out of AMD is just great. Congratulations, nice job, nice work. I don't see it changing in the next few quarters. And frankly, if you want a nice chip, maybe that Ryzen is a pretty good one to buy. But that being said, there is another question here, and that's the Xilinx acquisition. So AMD announced about a year ago that they were going to acquire Xilinx. These acquisitions take a while, and Xilinx is just keeping on humming. They also reported really good numbers, and their acquisition, by the way, is tied to AMD stock, not cash. So effectively, AMD doing well makes Xilinx happy because they're getting even more money from their acquisition. And so the bottom line there is it going to happen? Yes. Does it make sense? Well, I guess that's the big question. I was never 100% convinced by the Xilinx acquisition, frankly. We'll see where it goes. We'll see if it works out. Maybe AMD can make FPGA a valuable data center component. We'll see. And when will it happen? Well, it'll happen when it happens. These things have a tendency to drag on and on. I'm thinking of when NVIDIA bought Mellanox, and it took about a year and a half to get approvals, and then suddenly, boom, one day, acquisition is happening. I think that's what we're going to see with Xilinx. So AMD didn't really talk about it. Xilinx isn't talking about it. Nobody can talk about it. When it happens, it happens. And then comes the hard part, which is making the thing work. Will it work? We'll see. We'll see. Zach, we talked last week about Enable, the MSP-focused arm of SolarWinds. Well, Enable officially rang the bell, announcing their first trade on the New York Stock Exchange after splitting from the parent company in their IPO last week. In an interview with CRN, Enable's CEO shared some thoughts on the company moving forward, including plans to continue merging and acquiring companies, much like SolarWinds did before them. Zach, amidst the recent attacks carried out against SolarWinds, especially those targeting MSPs and other organizations with multiple organizations below them, will Enable be safe from attack now that they've left the mothership of SolarWinds?
That's an excellent question, Stephen, and honestly, one that I regretfully think is probably going to be the case. As we saw, back with the attack on SolarWinds last year, some of the biggest impact from that attack was on MSPs and other similar organizations, and unfortunately, you can only hope right now that Enable is very much aware of that, and you can see in the interview that Pagliuca is very concerned about security, and it's something that they're going to be really concerned about in the coming months. But ultimately, being concerned about security and being ready to be able to fend off an attack are two very different things. And I don't really know everything that's going on within Enable right now, besides celebrating, obviously. But at the end of the day, we'll really see if they're going to put their money where their mouth is, and put the resources behind actually preventing these attacks. And I think at the very least they are going to be targeted. It seems only inevitable given everything that's been going on recently in that sort of realm. So I would not be surprised to at least hear that someone attempted an attack on them or something similar. But my sincerest hope is that they are ready and able to, or enabled to take on this attack or any potential attacks that come in, because at the end of the day, as we saw coming out of the SolarWinds attack, the actual impact that these sort of things have on MSPs is huge, because they rely on tools like RMMs and other tools to deliver the services they provide to their customers. And at the end of the day, if that tool is what's hamstringing them, not only does that affect their business, but it affects their credibility, and it affects their ability to, continue to bring in new customers. And I just really hope that that's something that they really keep in mind, moving out of this kind of triumphant time.
So Zach, the other question that comes up with this Enable story is sort of what happens with SolarWinds. It's important to remember that SolarWinds is not Enable. Enable is a spin out from SolarWinds, an IPO from within SolarWinds. And it's also important to remember that SolarWinds has new management. I think the biggest fallout from the SolarWinds hack was the retirement of Kevin Thompson and the replacement with new CEO and the new CEO's new direction for the company. I'm hearing that SolarWinds is pivoting a bit themselves to more of a developer-centric mode, and we'll see where that goes with the company, the root company of Enable. So just like Enable is going to be focused on the MSP market, SolarWinds is going to refocus maybe away from their traditional market and the traditional tools. And we'll see, if that means that SolarWinds has a different future as well. And then finally, SolarWinds brand still is affected by this hack. And so we will see, again, if consumers, customers, not really consumers, since this is more B2B stuff, if customers are willing to still go with SolarWinds and give them their trust after having it be bruised in this hack. To me, frankly, the thing that gets me always is that this is really not a SolarWinds story. The hack that happened to them could have happened to almost anyone. And if you think that that hack was about SolarWinds, you're wrong. It's really about the state of IT tools today. And if you think that your tool is safe, well, just wait. I'm sure it'll happen.
Wonderful. All right, Stephen, we've queued it up quite a bit now, and we've reached the moment of truth, as the biggest news this week is coming from Intel, who announced their chip making roadmap for the next few years up to 2025. They have come under fire, including on this program, for losing the microprocessor fabrication race to rivals like TSMC and Samsung. But as we've said in the past, there's more to this story. With Intel renaming some process nodes and laying out a roadmap down to the angstrom scale, are they ready to make a comeback, Stephen?
Sure sounds like it. And let's start with maybe a little bit of the FUD about Intel. So is Intel behind other chip makers in terms of advanced process nodes? Definitely, 100%. They even admitted it themselves. The truth is that Intel has not kept up with some of the advancements, and that TSMC and Samsung are both ahead of them in terms of producing new advanced process nodes. But they're not as far back as you might think, and that's simply due to naming. So it's important to realize that many of the process node advancements, you've heard of, 7 nanometer, 5 nanometer, 4 nanometer, even 3 nanometer from some of these other companies. A lot of these things aren't actually 5, 7, 4, 3 nanometers. And that's a really bad state of affairs. Effectively, we've gotten to the point now where we have effective nanometer measurements. If you remember a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, we talked about IBM announcing a 2 nanometer scale process node that they had developed. And if you remember, my comment on that was that, yeah, surprise, this isn't actually 2 nanometer. It is the equivalent of 2 nanometer because of the transistor density that they're packing on the wafer. But the actual lithography is still, if I remember correctly, 10 or 7 nanometer. In other words, they're actually not doing what they claim to do, but effectively they are. And that's the same thing that's going on with TSMC and Samsung. So are they ahead in terms of manufacturing? Yeah. But are they as far ahead as it sounds? No. In fact, Intel's current 10 nanometer process node is actually more dense than TSMC and Samsung's 7 nanometer process node because of the advancements that Intel has put into this product. So effectively, what Intel is doing is renaming based on density instead of based on actual process lithography. And that sounds like a bunch of blah, 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 but just basically hear me out. There was a time when, you knew how big the engine in a Mercedes or a BMW was based on the two numbers on the back of the car. If it ended in 50, then it was a 5-liter engine. Now, you don't know because they're all turbocharged and it may be a 4-cylinder, with turbocharging and effectively a 5-liter. That's kind of what Intel's doing here. Intel's new process node, they're just calling it 7. Thankfully, they're not calling it 7 nanometers like their competitors. Their new process node called 7 is basically their process node called 10. But as I said, it's actually ahead of TSMC and Samsung's 7 nanometers. So sure, call it 7. The Intel process node that they're going to call 5 or 4 is going to be ahead of TSMC and Samsung's 5 or 4. And Intel is projecting out that they're going to actually have what they're calling 20A, which would be 2 nanometer or 20 angstrom process node, and an 18A in the future. And if you recall from that Qualcomm story, the 20A is the one that Qualcomm is theoretically going to use. But those don't use 2 nanometer lithography. What they do is they basically turn the chip on its side and stack things up in order to get more density. So it's effectively the same that you would expect from a 2 nanometer process, even though it's kind of not really. Frankly, I love this. I think that it's great that Intel is using numbers that we will be able to effectively compare to each other. It reflects the reality of modern chip making. And it also shows that there's a lot more to it than just the size of the lithography on the chip that matters. Intel's doing some other really cool things here too, including stacking silicon on silicon, which is something that most other companies aren't doing. They've developed some pretty cool techniques there to be able to sort of sandwich things together and pack more into the same chip. They're doing a pretty neat thing in terms of separating the way that the power is delivered to the chips, to the semiconductors on the chip in order to make it more dense. And they deserve a lot of credit for this. The truth is Intel has been innovating even as they've been slipping in their deliveries. Now that they've got Pat Gelsinger in charge and he's putting his foot down to the metal and he's trying to right the ship, I think Intel actually has a very strong chance of being the process node leader on their schedule, which is 2025. I would not be at all surprised if Intel ends up leapfrogging TSMC and becoming the leader in process nodes in 2025. And what will that mean? Well, one thing it'll mean is that everyone's going to be lining up to use Intel Foundry services to manufacture their advanced chips. So you heard it here first, Apple will have Intel manufacture their chips in 2025. Let's see if that happens. I think it will.
Yes, indeed. And especially, hearkening back to the statement you had made earlier about trying to make their naming convention a little bit more modernized and a little bit more updated to match that of their competitors. I think going in strong with, hearkening down to the angstrom scale is definitely going to turn some heads. And I think, like you said, it's certainly going to help boost their customers waiting at the door of the Intel Foundry services in the future for sure.
Well, thanks for joining me here, Zach. It's nice to have you on the rundown. Looking forward to seeing you again and again and again in the future episodes. Remember that the Gestalt IT Rundown is available as a podcast as well. Just look in your favorite podcatcher for the Gestalt IT Rundown. And we post it on YouTube every Wednesday at 12:30 Eastern Time. Just go to youtube.com/GestaltIT video to find it. We also post these videos on our Facebook page, facebook.com/GestaltIT, and we'll be posting these on our LinkedIn page going forward. We will be back next Wednesday to talk about the IT news of the week that was. But until then, for myself, Stephen Foskett, for Zach, and for all of us here in the Gestalt IT Global Headquarters, here's wishing you and yours a happy chocolate-filled day.